Hello there. Rishi Sunak has put the eco-loons into a tailspin, and they are furious. The UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has really sent the Eco Brigade into orbit, because he's just approved the go-ahead for the Rosebank oil and gas project in the North Sea, something that will give us access to as much as 500 million barrels of oil. That makes it the largest known field remaining in the North Sea, with ministers saying this will give a boost to UK energy security. But Rishi needs to go much further and faster, especially with nuclear power. And the eco-loons are weeping, with Greenpeace's UK climate campaigner Phil Richards saying it gives oil and gas companies carte blanche to ruin the climate. But as you'll see later on, Rosebank is small beer in the grand scheme of things where global emissions are concerned. Not even a blip. So the eco-outrage is totally unfounded. And as an interesting aside, Humza I Can Ride a Scooter Yousaf, the leader of the SNP, the party that once bet the whole Scottish Independence House on North Sea oil and gas in the 2014 independence referendum, came out today and called it akin to climate denial and the wrong decision. This is another demonstration of the UK government rolling back on its own climate ambitions, he said. Without this new investment, his constituents might be finding it cold and very difficult in future winters. But one aspect of this does not add up. The UK Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero, Claire Cortino, said, "We will continue to back the UK's oil and gas industry to underpin our energy security, grow our economy and help us deliver the transition to cheaper, cleaner energy." She also said that it would help us to steer clear of oil and gas that tyrants like President Putin of Russia profit from. While the PM X'd, "The Climate Change Committee have said you don't reach net zero by wishing it. As we make the transition to renewables, we will still need oil and gas. It makes sense to use our own supplies, such as Rosebank. This is the right long-term decision for the UK's energy security." Now, I'm all for drilling for oil and gas to keep us warm and able to cook, as well as fill up my trusty internal combustion engine car and motorcycle. But I'm not fooled into thinking, as Rishi puts it, that we will be using our own supplies. Because, unless that oil and gas is used exclusively in the UK, that is very, very unlikely to happen. Because the oil and gas produced will be traded on the international markets and it will go to the highest bidder, with only about 20% eventually going to the UK, or so the eco-zealots tell us. And the reason it gets sold at global prices is that is the only way to get oil and gas speculators to invest in the project. If they thought they would have to sell it off cheap to a UK-only market, they wouldn't bother. Remember that the company exploiting this field is the Norwegian-owned oil and gas giant Equinor. And as we turn the oil and gas spigots on, OPEC countries will no doubt reduce their output to keep the prices high, if our added amount actually makes any difference to the international price at all. That's what OPEC does. But the one big benefit for the UK government could be the economic position, because it is expected to generate £8.1 billion in investment and £6.3 billion benefiting the UK-based businesses, and support 1,200 new jobs once drilling starts. But the total additional North Sea output would only get a small and temporary production boost. However, that would mean that we'd have to import less oil and gas, so reducing our own carbon footprint. Something the virtue-signalling eco-clowns refuse to acknowledge. And I gather that an environmental pressure group called Uplift are looking to take legal action to get the government's North Sea Transition Authority decision to OK the field ruled as illegal. And Caroline Lucas, the lone Green Party MP, has called this decision a climate crime and morally obscene. I presume it's okay and not a crime or morally obscene to let people, probably the elderly, freeze in the upcoming winter though, if renewables fail us. And as the UK government has said, we will still be relying on oil and gas for decades to come, and no amount of screeching is going to change that. On a balance, if we drill for our own oil and gas, we will be using resources far more efficiently and getting a positive economic outcome from it in the process. What's not to like? Speaking to BBC's Today programme, Gilad Myerson, Executive Chair of Ithaca Energy, which is a British company and is Equinor's minority partner on the Rosebank project, said, "At the moment, the UK is a net importer of both oil and gas. The objective is to make sure the emissions per barrel of the oil and gas is the lowest possible. We have the capability to produce oil and gas for our own domestic production at significantly lower CO2 emissions per barrel." And that's what political decision-making is all about, balances. But I just wish the Tories hadn't been so wet and stood up to those eco-zealots a lot earlier. Or maybe the civil serpentry is now so full of green acolytes that getting anything through is an utter nightmare. Or is it that the political parties have, over the years, filled up their ranks of MPs with net zero at any cost types, just like they filled up their ranks with anti-Brexit good Europeans for all those years? And just look at the Tory MP Alok Sharma, a former chair of the COP26 committee, saying he'll now be standing down at the next election after Rishi Sunak went all wobbly on net zero. Maybe getting through all of those people is like trying to hack your way through a jungle with a teaspoon. That may perhaps explain the tentative and almost hesitant way that Sunak is trying to turn the net zero tanker around to take what he's called a more pragmatic route. But he needs to get his and his ministers' shoulders to the wheel and really walk back on those disastrous fast-tracked net zero plans for the ruination of the UK. At least the Labour Party leader, Keir Starmer, will be keeping his grubby mitts off this new project, as he's promised not to stop licences that have already been granted should he end up in number 10. But he has said as soon as he gets into power, there will be no further licences. Now, Equinor and Ithaca say they will start the first phase of the project immediately with £3.8 billion of investment and start production in 2026 or 2027, pumping out 70,000 barrels of oil a day. And just to put that in perspective, in 2022, UK oil consumption was about 1.32 million barrels a day. So this extra 70,000 adds some 5% to that figure. Now look at what China, India, the EU and the US are producing. So why are the eco-loons all in a lather over Rosebank? Unless it's all about virtue signalling while taking an easy target of a supine UK political system to task.